Man's got to stick some chicken nuggets in his mouth before he gets started tonight. Bear with me. And that's not exactly fair. We've got a bot for processing commands, but referring to me as a bot's have to get you slapped. But we're going to do 33 days in a row of this. That's got to make me some kind of machine, right? Well, rest assured, mate, once I figure out how I can quit my job and do this full time, I'll have all the bots you could possibly want. All right, it's 8 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I'll try and keep the chewing noises to a minimum. I have struck the grass. Sorry, guys. My monitor died there for a second. Looked like it wasn't switching off intermission. All right, so let's get started. Make sure our sound is working. Everybody hear me okay? I cleaned off the clutter before we started this set of streams. I have an enormous pile of icons out there that I play around with, but for now they're all stuffed in a folder labeled storage. All right. Okay, so we've got about 40 some blocks. That's good. Let's take a look here. So last night when I was talking about you have to set up dig circle before you can use that hotkey, this is kind of what I meant. You have to tell dig circle what kind of circle you're going to want before it can repeatedly dig the same one. So now that we've done that, I could redo that again and again, and we could do it without having to use the command every time. But all right, so we're going to use this as our temple space. Now, normally you're going to want to get a temple up fairly early. Uh, the reason, no, no, the same background is this definitely the same background, Valdemar. I haven't changed that. That's been the same all along, man. It was like a must. But the icons that I normally have for all my utilities and games and what all are usually strewn all over my desktop, and I've cleaned all that shit off. It's all wiped away into a folder. Um, Gotta be minimalist. It's important to focus on what matters for this stream. Come on now. So, normally you're going to want to get a temple up fairly quickly. Unfortunately, in the current version, uh, Toady has allowed stress to remain broken, so a temple will help, and so will getting managers and places to sleep and all this other stuff. But realistically, tonight or very shortly in the streams, the next couple, we're probably going to have to resort to using DF hack to kind of bypass the broken stress system at the moment. And for those of you who are immediately recoiling in horror that I'm going to manipulate the game in such a fashion, unfortunately, Toady himself has admitted it's broken, and since he hasn't bothered to get a release out to fix it yet, I got to do what I got to do to keep things running. Uh, the things that I'm doing for my fortress, I am doing because they will help you to mitigate stress in a normal situation. But unfortunately, the abnormal accumulation of stress and the abnormal accumulation of de-stressors has led to a situation where stress basically accumulates on a positive ramp for just about every dwarf all the time, no matter what you do with it. Now, there are things you can do to tamp down on it, but realistically, your dwarves are all a bunch of pansies at the moment, and they can't handle anything. So, earlier in the stream, we had a bunch of human blood coming down on our dwarves. That's right now one of the big stressors. If you leave your dwarves out in the rain for very long, they can have their entire, personalities set to the doldrums, basically. Sound sense is on. I killed the automated play while I was running the manual one to do sound check. And what I should have done was just muted it temporarily, and I didn't. That's on me. Oh well. All right, so we need our miners to go ahead and dig out this temple space down here. And what I kind of have in mind for this basic fort is we're going to use this entry atrium kind of space here as a combination statue garden temple space, if you will. And I'm going to put some statues up in our uh, drinks space as well. Dwarves will move themselves into the drinking space on a regular basis. Having statues to look at will assist them in keeping their stress down and giving them good things to think about. But since the system is broken currently, that alone is probably not going to be enough over the long haul. Now, since I'm coming back to this after a 24-hour away period, I usually want to make sure I check my units and see what everybody's doing. Looks like we're building a bunch of things at the moment, so we probably want to see where they're building. That's right. We were still building our staircases and our wall for the caves, and we really need to finish that before we go on to do anything else. So let's go ahead and tell the miners not to do any mining just yet, because that other thing is a little more important than this just yet. Things that can have your dwarves be attacked are generally more important than things that will keep your dwarves happy, unless you're really bad off. Okay, there's the stairs on the bottom level. Now, the reason I'm doing this construction this way, and while dwarves will normally handle it correctly, is they will have a problem sometimes with doing this corner block after everything else, and then they won't do it at all because they can't get to it. The dwarves were unable to complete the kitchen. Job item lost. What the hell did we try to build the kitchen out of? Use the same blocks I just designated for that? Okay, then. All right. Guessing it might have been when we destroyed the mason's shop. If they were in the shop and then we destroyed it, it relocates them, and sometimes it can lose the objects. Okay, so I'm going to digress for a moment to address that, Kleina Div, because I've seen you post that on on Reddit, and I'm going to make a point here for a moment. Toady is running ahead with this Steam release, and by all means, more power to him. I hope it goes well. But Dwarf Fortress and Toady, as a collective, have had a generalized vision where new features are more important than bug fixes, even unto the point that the game can be made unplayable. And it is my personal opinion, which I will announce right here and now. If Toady is cavalier about bug fixes in the Steam version, the Steam user base will hammer Dwarf Fortress into the ground. Dedicated user bombing on reviews is not going to fix that problem. It doesn't matter how many diehards on the forum there are, there's a lot more people out there using Steam than there are diehard DF forum users. If Toady goes ahead and keeps doing this thing where we're going to kick out a release and we're just going to keep adding features and we're going to ignore that things are broken, Steam users aren't going to put up with that, even in early access games forever. You can get away with an early access game if it's reasonably playable. If you constantly are having things that are absolutely running the game into the ground, they will panic. I hope like hell he's taken it into consideration, that's all. If the only feedback he's listened to is on the forums, and he's not thinking about how moving on to Steam is transitioning Dwarf Fortress from his pet project into a more business relationship, I'm not sure he's grasped where he's going. But hey, I'm just a knob sitting on a stream playing Dwarf Fortress. What do I know? No, I don't think he does it for the money. Because I mean, don't get me wrong, he makes a decent living. Not anything. He's not a millionaire or anything, but he makes a good living at this. The catch is that he doesn't have insurance, or at least provided through his employers. He's got to pay for all that. So a lot of the things that people take for granted with their employment, he's not going to get that by virtue of being a an independent contractor. Let's call it independent service provider. The recent insurance scare they had, like I said, I hope they're doing well because I don't want to see them go. I want Dwarf Fortress to be finished at some point eventually. When I'm about 80 and I've got time to play it longer. All right. And we won't have to go much further up, and we'll have walled the whole thing off. And at that point, we can, drill into this giant chunk of flux stone that we're sitting on top of. I think he does it because it's a passion project. And don't get me wrong, I can respect that. It's a hellacious thing to leave the corporate world and pursue your passion project and make it work for you. Dude's been inducted into the Museum of Modern Art. Give the man his respect, right? But if he's really listening to a bunch of users on the forums who he can't, who he can't conclusively prove are using the as released version, and he's using that reliably as his baseline to determine whether fixes are good, man, that's gonna bite back in a bad way. All right, so now we've got this finally walled off, so that's safe. Now we can get the temple space dug out properly. Now, one of the other things you can do if you don't have a whole lot of space is you could technically use the location you've designated for your dining room, this meeting area here, and you could also make that into a temple. Could make this into a temple zone. Now, I'm not planning to. I like to have my dining area and my temple separately. But if you're in a hurry for space, dwarves will go without a dining room a lot longer than they will without a temple. You're definitely not going to hear me tell players they just need to get good about Dwarf Fortress. That's really condescending and elitist. Come on, dwarves, faster. All right. Now, it's worth noting here that this one notification is not the seed spam that you'll get in a lot of new fortresses. He really is running out of actual seeds to plant. We haven't actually brewed any of our plump helmets, so we have our stockpile of drink is diminishing, and we need to start converting our drink into booze quickly in order to keep it running. So we're gonna go down here and set up brewing. And frankly, I would just normally put brewing on repeat to start. You can come back later if you want and set up a job, or you can set up a workflow for it. But for right now, we don't have enough dwarves to worry about running out. Just more worry about getting the actual booze brewed. We might not have enough empty barrels to actually do that, in which case we'll need to make some rock pots. Looks like we're going to get some booze, though, so that's good. Since we've been discussing the stress mechanic, let's take an opportunity to go ahead and take a peek at our dwarves and make sure they're doing okay, or at least reasonable. So here's an example. Let's take a look through our dwarves. They're okay, but not great. Uneasy about not having a temple, couldn't make crafts, the basic stuff you'd expect when you're starting a fortress up. That's odd. I can't actually make that into a location prop. Oh, but it's going to have something in it. In fact, we should probably have our mason kick out a couple of statues while we're on the subject. Okay, and we'll let him do that so we can get our yeah, but do the statue niches or do the statues in the niches that aren't in the temple zone actually count for purposes of being in the temple for purposes of praying? I mean, dwarves don't need the statues necessarily as long as they have the temple zone, right? But I mean, do they actually get a benefit from having the statue nearby then? And we're doing this first area to no specific deity for the reason that if I want to have specific deity temples, I'll excavate rooms down hallways and I'll set temples off to the one side. We'll just basically make this the temple level. See, that's another example. If dwarves don't know how to fulfill the needs, how do they reduce their own stress? That's did we unit test this or all right. So our dwarves who need something to do are now coming down here and standing near one another and doing a little socializing. Unfortunately, they'll move around too much to make good friends. So there's a couple ways you can get around that. You can burrow them into narrow spaces and force them into proximity. You can make much smaller rooms than I do in order to in order to force them into proximity. But the old mechanic where dwarves would make friends and converse with one another as they went to and from jobs, and while they were doing jobs, as they walked past one another, that doesn't work that way anymore. Let's see. Meditate on jealousy, play make believe. Oh, that's our kid. Yeah, we don't care about him. Let's see. Not yet, anyway. Oh, we've got all harvest on. Let's talk about the orders menu. We don't want to do that anymore. Farmer's harvest. Okay, so in the orders menu, you can set up various tasks that you want to be limited in very specific ways to make sure your dwarves aren't doing things as a general practice that you don't want them to do. So, for example, in the forbid section of orders, I want to normally forbid my dead and forbid my death items and forbid other non-hunted dead and other dead items. And the reason I want to forbid all this stuff is because in the event of a siege, if a dwarf gets killed, even if I forbid my own dead, if I don't forbid his outfit, then everybody goes rushing out the front door to grab a sock. Now we'll prevent some of that with burrows, but then you get a different problem. Instead of them rushing out to grab the sock, they're looking at instead of going out to grab the sock, they're then looking at the burrow spam because they can't get there from here. So they go, "Oh, I want to go get that sock, but I'm in a burrow. I can't want to go get that sock, but I'm in a burrow." And you just get spammed to death. So I will forbid these items until I am capable of allowing the dwarves to get out of their hole and go after them. Let's see. In the refuse category, I want to ignore refuse from outside. You can make skulls into totems, Bones have uses, shells have uses, skins have uses, hair and wool have uses, but other usually probably doesn't. Not entirely sure what would qualify as other, but I'm betting it's nervous tissue, cartilage, and other random bits that aren't going to be used for anything at the moment. I don't care about food being mixed. I do want bodies gathered, furniture gathered, food, animals, announce some job. Okay, let's take a look at activity zone orders. Prefer zone drinking, zone only fishing. The reason I'm not making it zone only drinking is I want to allow dwarves who need water and for some reason can't get to the well to have a chance to drink from the river or a pond or something to keep themselves alive. Now that's not ideal, obviously, but I I get the notion of making them a myth and magic feature, but then if you've made your dwarves reliant on them and expect them, then you've already implemented the feature halfway. You need to at least finish that part first. It would be better not to start implementing those features if we're going to make them part of later expansions. The one thing that I like about being, at least I don't know if it's the one thing, but one of the few things that I like about being a corporate programmer, if you will, is that there's somebody who's monitoring the plan. Individual chapels overlapped. Oof. Okay. Well, we're definitely getting our prey on. That's good. Okay. Take a quick look at our stocks. Food's good. Drink's good. Okay. Okay. I'm going to order. Got to get a manager set up here. We haven't done that yet. Time to put our noble to something more useful than digging, at least in passing. So let's get a small tunnel complex off the dining room. And the reason I do it off the dining room is because then it's very easily accessible. We'll make this room a little bigger than we would have in past forts, and we'll do a couple of rooms to house various minor nobles, functionaries for your fortress that require a small office and some furniture. Nothing major. Your bookkeeper, uh, your manager, that kind of thing. They don't need much to start. So later we'll house our nobles, kings, barons, etc., off this same chamber, so they're easily accessible by all the dwarves who are sitting right there. If somebody decides they want to go piss off at the nobles, they can go do it. And out to the west side, we'll dig the catacombs, because I like to bury my dwarves where they can be right next to the dining hall. And we'll put a lever complex to the north or south for all the gate levers and what all. Okay. And we'll go into nobles and we'll make our expedition leader also our manager. Because that's what his entire purpose was to be, is to do some of those functions. He's our trader and our manager both, so we'll have to disable him temporarily when we, if we want him to be a trader, or switch him off a manager and onto broker. All right. Now it's worth noting that eventually you're going to want to have, in a normal fort, all of these noble positions filled. They don't need to be filled immediately. It doesn't matter if we have a bookkeeper right now. We don't need a guy keeping records. We need a guy moving blocks to the walls. We don't really need a broker. There's nobody coming to trade yet. Autumn hasn't even arrived yet. Chief Medical Dwarf, technically you'll want to have before somebody gets injured, but you can assign them at that moment. The Hammerer and Sheriff handle justice in your fortress, and, well, we're not worried about crime just yet. We're still building. Militia Commander will get assigned the moment we start doing military. We'll assign somebody to do that job and then create a squad for all the captains who do the actual fighting. Generally speaking, I use a hapless dwarf for my militia commander and keep him relatively safe. I don't know if it's been fixed in current versions, but it used to be the case that it can really cause a problem if your militia commander falls in combat because you can't make changes to the militia. Since it's obligatory to have a militia commander as the first thing you do when you create a military, the game checks to see if you have one before it will allow you to do anything else. Now, if we go back to our management queue, our manager hasn't gone and done it yet. What's he up to? What's he working on? He's thinking about mountains. You hear that, Senjai? You got to get on it, man. We need you to get those statues queued. So in the manager, you can set up certain. Oops, it's construct rock statue. That's not the one I want. My bad. Need to check the conditions on that because I didn't want to do that repeatedly. That's not the right run. And I want to remove the condition. There we go. Now, let's go change the one I actually wanted to change. I'm not sure why the amount of seeds matters when I'm brewing drinks. I guess technically because you could do it to get seeds that way, but that's not really what I would do to do that. Ugh, marked as a bug. That must be the militia commander thing I was asking about. Okay, bear with me here because I don't have all of this committed to muscle memory. It changed recently enough before I last played that I can do it, but I have to think it through. We want our drinks to be at least, at most, 1,000. And if drinks is, where's the condition here? Oops. No, 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 no. There we go. If the amount of drinks is less than 1,000. And that way, as what will happen here is that this will start up 30 brew drink jobs every day if the amount of drinks is less than 1,000. Now that allows me to stop thinking about how much booze is in my fort and just guarantee that I always have 1,000 drinks on hand, basically. Now it does require that I make sure that the plants are available for the brewing. It doesn't guarantee that dwarves will go down the production chain for me. I have to handle my own logistics. I have to make sure that everything's available for them, but they'll do the jobs, and then I don't have to think about it anymore. So the goal here is that my dwarves will make roasts anytime there are less than 1,000 roasts. Now you can make the cheaper, easier to make foods. There's nothing wrong with that. But generally speaking, your dwarves get the best happiness out of having the best meals, and since we're already having problems with stress anyway, the better food is more valuable to us. Additionally, if you're going to go through the process of grinding up all your plants or all of your materials, you probably want to get the most bang for your buck. Now, if food is scarce, don't use lavish meals. Use the biscuits and the stews. Okay, and then that gives us, and we don't care about the shop, I don't think. We want to, I don't care about, I really don't care about maximum workshops, but that one can go all the way up. And I'm not going to specify the images and whatnot for right now. So we've got a bunch of statues that we threw downstairs that probably aren't even about the gods that are involved in the temples that they're praying at. But that's okay. I'm not really concerned at this point in this juncture with worrying about the exact deities involved. Now, if we come back and we check our manager, these jobs earlier were technically not queued yet because they had been not checked. So once it ran the check, it says, yes, you've got less than 1,000 food. Yes, you've got less than 1,000 drinks. I'm going to do those things that you want done. You can use this to maintain supplies of needed materials for a lot of things. You can guarantee that you always have a certain number of blocks to build walls with. You can guarantee that you have a certain number of battle axes and picks available for your squad. You can make sure that uh, you always have clothing for your dwarves. That'll be something we'll definitely have to do later to make sure that there's always a certain amount of clothing available so that your dwarves are never run around in rags just because there's nothing to pick up. Miners are complaining because we're not digging enough. That's hilarious. Okay, so since we've allowed all these guys to prey, unfortunately, there is a downside to that. And the downside is our farmer isn't farming, he's praying. So let's take a moment and start talking about custom professions. And I'll build these up as I go. And then we'll talk about maybe exporting them once I'm done, because I'll reuse these over and over and over again. Um, let's start with our farmer. Let's find him here. Here he is. Check what he's got, what we've got him doing. He's farming primarily. Um, I'll generally have my dedicated farmers also do my plant gathering, plant processing, uh, that kind of stuff. So they're doing all the plant work, if you will. These tasks here and the kitchen tasks I'll generally put together, but the plant stuff I'll usually have done by the farmer, so it gives them something extra to do. Now, we're going to go ahead and create a custom profession from this dwarf. We're going to call it farmer. Planter is technically correct, but we're going to use farmer. We're going to disable architecture because I forgot to actually disable it from the profile. We don't really want our farmers doing architecture in the final fort. We'll dedicate someone to that. You could set a role for them if you wanted, make this a grower or an herbalist. We're not going to mess with roles just yet. Okay, and it's going to mark those tasks on him that we want done, which we'll commit. So now our farmer is a farmer. And now we can do this trick where we go up here, we sort by their profession, and our farmer is in his own category. Now, Dwarf Fortress provides profession names for all of the things that people come in, cheesemakers and leatherworkers and such, and I don't really like to use those names if I can avoid them because I want to use my own names, and that way I can tell if somebody hasn't been reassigned. So what we'll do instead is we'll come down here and rename this thing. And then we'll commit him. Now, the advantage of doing it this way is I can tell when somebody comes in and they're a pump operator that this is Dwarf Fortress giving them a job as a migrant, something that I haven't assigned. So I can recognize immediately that that's somebody we need to create a profession for. So we'll make this guy a smith. And I'm not super concerned necessarily with having masterworks so much as I am getting jobs done. So we're going to go ahead and have our smiths assigned generically to start. And if we want to specialize them later, we can go back and pick out the smiths category and disable the labors we want to not have the general folks doing so that they specialize from that point. But in order to get to that point where we have all of these specialists doing things, we would need at least 4 smiths, one to cover each task. And at present, at best, we have about 3. Maybe 4 if we count our farmer, but we can't count him because he's going to spend most of his time doing farming, ideally. So what we really want to do is stick this guy in, get him a smithing, and then we'll probably stick this guy in and make him a smith as well. And we'll assign them wood burning and make sure they've got furnace operating. Yeah, he was a miller, but we don't need a miller. We're not worried about milling plants. We're worried about getting pointy things we can stab goblins with. Notice that my smiths get lumped together. Now, technically, we could have made this guy a leather worker. He's got a higher leather working skill, but I really don't care about leather artifacts. Leather goods decay and get damaged a lot easier than metal artifacts do, so I'd really rather keep the metal stuff around. Well, not artifacts, but items, I guess I should say, objects. Your leather cloak gets chewed up. Your breastplate is pretty much good forever. So what I'd try to do is make leatherworking an alternate skill for people where possible, rather than their primary. That way, I'm focusing them down a different path for artifacts. An artifact cloak would be nice. An artifact backpack is, I guess, okay, but there are leather objects that you wouldn't want. So there's Smiths. Let's see. Gem setter. Oh, I know what we haven't done yet. So let's go ahead and disable all the labors on this guy. There we go. Get some dedicated haulers. Now, this guy is shearing and pump operating, and that's nice. You can do that. But typically speaking, I'll use my haulers to do pump operating and other miscellaneous tasks like potash making and lye making and pressing and milling and all these things I really don't care about. Not cooking and brewing though. Butchery, tanning, but not leatherworking because leatherworking is a mutable skill. Not bone carving because bone carving is a mutable skill. Uh, Soaping. And if there's wood burning tasks, I guess we can have these guys do it and get our smiths doing something more useful. So let's do that. Okay. We'll update that thing, and then we'll update this one from the dwarves that we modified so that that gets done properly. And now all our future haulers will get assigned correctly. Now, this guy is technically a chief medical dwarf, so we'll reassign him. Oops. Now, while initially we're going to use him primarily as a hauler, we're also going to set him up so he has medical labors enabled so that we can set our doctor up and have our doctor available before somebody gets stabbed by a goblin or killed by a cave-in or something else. Now, I know some of you folks might be asking me why mining is a crafter and not something else. And this is a little obnoxious to sort all these guys out the first time. So we got to basically build a list of professions. But the advantage is that once we set these professions up, sorting future migrants is a cakewalk. You just pick a profession and away you go. Now, if you're worried about making high quality stone crafts for export, you probably want to separate your mason and your stone crafter. These are both mutable skills, and my mason is much more advanced mason than he is a stone crafter. In a more advanced fort, I'll separate out engravers, stone crafters, and such. But initially, I'm more concerned with getting things done than I am with making sure that they're super high quality. So to start with, I'll enable these labors on these guys, but later on, we'll go back and separate them out into separate categories. All right, now everybody's properly grouped up in whatever tasks they're really doing. Now let's go back through and look to make sure we've got our nobles doing useful things and our make sure our noble isn't doing anything. We want our broker to be available on demand. So aside from a couple of very limited tasks, I'm not going to have him doing much in the way of hauling. Now we will enable labors on him, primarily mining, so that he has something to do when he's not trading. But over the long haul, what we want to do is have him mining when there's mining to do and there's no trader in town. And then the moment a trader rolls up, we can flip his mining labor off, and he'll make a run. He'll turn the broker flag on, and he'll go take a run for the depot. And we can guarantee that he'll basically, aside from food and drink, be ready to go at a moment's notice. And unfortunately, we can't control his food and drink, so that's about as good as you can get it. You can leave your broker idle, and in a fort with 200 dwarves or 150 dwarves, having an idler or two is not as bad a thing. But early on, it's important to keep your dwarves running at something approaching as efficiently as you can get them, because you simply don't have many dwarves and time is working against you. Now, as it happens, our kitchen worker, I think, now notice I didn't make that job part of the broker job. We can disable it, or we can, force his skills into that, and it will undo that enabling. But we want it on for now, so he's not just sitting around idle completely. All right. Sure. Taking a look here, see if there's anything else I've forgotten to do here, because there's almost always something I've forgotten to do. This is a lot of smiths in an early fort. We probably won't need all of them doing smithing labors early on. So they'll be doing a lot of hauling in the meantime. If we need leatherworking, I can turn it on this guy, but I have a plan for leatherworking that normally doesn't involve having my smiths do it. Um, I'll create dedicated hunters who will have the hunting labor, but they'll also do things like butchery, uh, milking, cheese making, animal handling, leatherworking, tanning, bone carving, probably even wood carving. That way they can make their own bolts, they can handle their own hunting, and if they're not doing hunting, then they can sit in the fortress and handle the animals. Welcome aboard, retired Navy vet. I think I have everything I want to do for now. With all the dwarves doing all their praying, I'm not sure any of the rest of this will matter. Turn masonry off on our kitchen worker here. Yep, I need to disable those and then redo this. Okay, so kitchen worker. We're going to have haulers doing these, so we won't mess with these in this fort for this guy. I'll leave butchery on because I always want to have somebody available to do that. And then we'll re-enable that labor specifically because he actually has a good surgery skill in case somebody has to do it. Now, right now, it would probably default to the noble because he's not doing anything, and our kitchen worker is going to be, or kitchen worker is going to be really busy. So he's got stuff to do, and he won't be available for the surgery. So if somebody gets injured, we'd have to disable the labor on the doctor in order to get the kitchen worker into the fray, as it were. Nobles don't encourage other dwarves. Okay, well that's technically not true. Nobles do encourage other dwarves. It just doesn't matter in the current version. So We're actually going to put you to work primarily, at least in the initial fort here, doing your mining. That not only gets you a mutable skill as a noble, which is nice, but it also means that when you're not doing broker tasks, we can do mining. Now, we also made you the manager, so if we want you to do manager tasks, I also have to turn that off temporarily right now. Two miners is probably enough for now. Unfortunately, the downside to doing things like this is that our broker is going to expect to mine occasionally. So if we don't flip him onto mining occasionally, he'll get upset that he wasn't able to practice a craft. Ugh. Oh, there's a question for you, Clenadev. Maybe you know. Uh, does Toady intend to have dwarves who are doing noble tasks not get upset because they can't practice a craft? Or is the expectation that all nobles everywhere will also be crafters? There's a thought for your future, the fortress. We can give you architecture as well. That's something nobody has at the moment that we need. So I do notice we don't have any mechanics. We'll temporarily make our smiths into mechanics so we can get some drawbridge action going. And just to make sure we have architecture available, we'll do a couple of those too. Now, just to be clear, later down the road, I'll assign somebody the architecture job, probably a noble who's not doing anything else, like the doctor. In fact, actually, that's a good idea. Let's do that now. If I need to turn architecture off so he'll attend to dwarves, that's a simple task. There aren't not going to be that many architecture tasks, and building up architecture skill is difficult. So you're going to kind of want a specialist to do it if you want your buildings architected well. Yeah, that's why I've got them. That's why we've got our first set of nobles up and running. We're going to get a bookkeeper and some others up and running, but our broker slash manager is and slash expedition leader is our only noble at the moment, besides the doctor, I guess. Don't think there's anything else I want. I know this has been a while I've been staring at this, and I apologize for making you all stare at this grid for as long as we have. But I do want to make sure I've done this correctly, so I don't have to come back and go, "What did I do wrong?" All right, let's take a look, see what everybody's doing. Yep, we're totally busy in the temple, bastards. Kitchen work is going. That's good. So let's give them some place to put those so that they don't rot. Let's make sure that this is holding our prepared meals. Yes, we did set this up correctly. Good, 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 good. Okay, so prepared meals can come down here and get stashed. That's perfect. So I've used up all the tables I had built, so we're going to switch over to the manager. And generally speaking, once you become familiar with the manager, what you're going to want to do is anytime you find yourself making something that you think you might want any more of in the future, whether that's sandbags or tables or chairs or whatever, put a small number into an actively monitored job. It doesn't have to be checked daily if it's not something you really care about that much. You can check it monthly or whatever. But making sure your dwarves always have, say, 5 or 10 tables and 5 or 10 beds or 5 or 10 cabinets. It'll take up a little bit of room in a stockpile somewhere to house that extra furniture, but you're guaranteed to always have furniture available without having it run away production to eat up your supplies or fill up your stockpiles. No, 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 no. The whole point of doing this as a tutorial is that folks can see what I'm doing and ask questions if they don't immediately understand what I'm doing or why I'm doing it. The whole point is to discuss is so that anybody who's watching who hasn't already played Dwarf Fortress before can get an idea of what it is that I'm doing, why I do it, what benefit it serves them, and then make an informed decision about whether they want to copy what I'm doing, modify what I'm doing, or maybe even propose to me some improvement on what I'm doing. And my wife behind me is chiming in to say, and just for the record, you could just listen to him over and over again, and you'll probably get the handle without ever having to play the game. I don't think it's quite that good, but my wife is want to make tease of me doing this over and over again. All right. So statues, blocks, meals, plants. Okay, so let's go back into our manager and let's queue up tables and chairs, which are actually thrones, because why not? And we'll get some rock thrones. Now, if you want to do something special, maybe you have glassworking or you want everything in your fortress to be made out of iron or whatever, you don't have to queue up rock thrones. And even if you do queue up rock thrones, let's say you're going back later in your fortress because you've built an obsidian caster, like we'll do down the road, and you want to go back and make all of your furniture, now that you have high skilled dwarves and plenty of obsidian to make things out of, you want all of your furniture to be made out of high value black obsidian studded with some sort of metal and gems or whatever. Well, at that point, you're going to need lots and lots of obsidian thrones. So, what you would do is come in here and select a job to make obsidian thrones or make rock thrones and then set the material so that it was obsidian. Now, I don't need a huge number of thrones all the time, but 5 of them constantly ready and available is not a bad thing. So we're going to go in here and check the conditions. We'll increment it so it's restarts if completed. If you don't want it checked all the time, maybe it's something you only want to concern yourself with periodically, you could reduce that. But I'm not, this is something that if we've used all of these, I want to make more. Um, Now this will queue them up in lots of 5. So if our condition goes 1 under, it doesn't queue up a rock throne job, it queues up 5 rock throne jobs. Those could be spread out or in the same shop, depending on how you set it up. Right now, I don't particularly care who does that. Later on, you might want to limit your furniture production to a shop that specializes in only the high skilled dwarves using it so that you have high skilled masons making your furniture instead of low skilled masons. At the very beginning of your fortress, unless you're concerned about getting it right the first time, as it were, then better they have a wide variety of things up and available than waiting on a specialist to get one thing ready. But down the road, we're going to want to specialize this job, link it to a workshop, limit that workshop to just our super skilled masons. But right off the bat, nah, we don't care. If we end up with a bunch of rock thrones we're not going to use anymore, we'll stick them under a drawbridge and lower it. No, I guess 10 is good there. So what will happen is here it will queue up 5 jobs no more than once a day. So if we're at 9 thrones, which is less than 10, would trigger it. It will queue up 5 rock jobs, so we'll go up to 14. However, if we were at 1 throne because we've used all of them but one, it'll still only queue up 5 jobs on that first day, so we'll only go up to 6 on day 1. And then on day 2, we'd still be less than 10, so you'd get another batch of 5 thrones. Now, this will help keep these jobs from overwhelming your workstations if you want to make sure that other tasks you're queuing up have a chance to bite at the apple. Otherwise, you are creating what software engineers would call a race condition, where you have 2 jobs both competing for the same limited resource, and the one that gets it first is going to deadlock the other one out. And you might not get the result you want depending on the timing of the jobs. All right, so we've got our rock thrones. They're going to be made daily if we've got less than 10. That's good. Let's go ahead and queue up a second job for tables. Same as before, we'll go up to 10 and we'll make 5 at a time. That'll keep from overwhelming our masons, and it means that we'll get thrones and tables instead of just thrones, or we'll get thrones and tables and that other thing that I haven't queued up yet that none of the experts have reminded me to make yet, but we're going to need them down the road anyway. And we'll do less than 10 on those two. Let's see. What else am I going to need? Coffers. We're going to need coffers. Yes, we are. And this time I want all of these because I'm going to be when I place these, I'm going to be placing them in large groups usually for bedrooms, for example, nobles' offices, that kind of thing. You normally won't need a huge number of tables all at once, except for your dining room. You're going to put a few here or a few there, one at a time, or maybe you'll stick them in a bedroom and you might need 5 or 6 in a go. But coffers are sometimes placed 2 or 3 to a room, so even if you're doing, one table per room, you're probably going to stick 2 coffers in that same room. Oh no, so Senjai, seriously, if you've never used the manager, once you get your head wrapped around it, you're going to wonder how you played without it. If you've ever used the old DF hack tool workflow, manager works more or less just like workflow used to. Um, it's not quite as snappy and responsive as workflow was because workflow was checking a lot more regularly, I believe, than daily. But you could it was the same basic principle. You could float your resource within a range, guarantee your production based on certain types of materials. The manager basically usurped all of what workflow, well, I won't say all, but a lot of what workflow was originally built to do. Yeah, and it's basically built in right here now, so that you don't have to mess with DF hack for this quite as much anymore. So, in addition to coffers, we're going to want to do beds. Beds is one of those things that we can get our carpenter doing. And since it's on a different queue, we don't necessarily care as much about choking our mace in the same way. Now, the difference between these two jobs, the coffin and the coffer, not in terms of type, but in terms of how I've set the jobs up. Coffins will build no more than 5 per day. Coffers can fill their entire queue. So the difference is in how they'll float. Um, if we had one coffer, then it would queue 10 jobs and we would end up with 11. If we had 9 coffers, we would queue up 10 jobs and it would make 19. So we'll float between 11 and 19. Whereas with the coffins, we would float between 9 or between 14 and 10. Trust me, he's going to choke on the number of jobs we've got him doing here. So we also need to queue up beds, and I forgot to do it. Okay, now I moved beds to the top because I want beds to be uh, checked first. If there's anything else that's going to use wood, I want beds first. I don't care if my carpenter can also make buckets and bins and barrels. If there's wood and we don't have enough beds, beds come first because beds can only be made from wood. Mist generators in the current version are probably a really useful thing. For new players who aren't familiar, a mist generator is basically a controlled waterfall. It's like a water feature that you might see at a fancy restaurant. You could put one in your dining room, and the mist it generates makes your dwarves happy when it wafts over them. They basically like being near the falls without actually being drowned by the water. The downside is that large scale fluid movements eat frame rate. So Even a small mist generator not only has all of the fluid movement, but also has all of the mist that has to pathfind. And so you're basically creating additional objects in the world that are doing pathfinding, even if the pathfinding is different from the way dwarves do it. And generally speaking, increasing your pathfinding is not going to help. Additionally, pumps move water very quickly. So if your mist generator is, say, on a pump, the pump is its own object, and that's checking repeatedly to see if it can move the water that it needs to move. At which point, it's producing a drain on your rate as well. Are they worth it? The effect stacks, as I recall, and although it's not particularly massive for an instance, having 2 or 3 sessions where your dwarf is eating a lavish meal while sitting in an awesome dining room and being doused by a mist generator, that stuff goes hand in hand. So, setting up mist generators or a mist generator in a commonly used room where all your dwarves are going to show up so that you can guarantee that the mist generation effect is on them isn't something to just dismiss out of hand. Um, in older versions, I would have considered it primarily a late fortress kind of add-on, something you do as icing on the cake because it's fairly, I won't call it labor intensive, but for a new player, it's not something I teach you on day one because frankly, you've got to build pumps, you got to know how mechanics work, you got to move water. All of those things have their own problems for new players. So I'll warm up to it. We'll get there. In the current version, uh, with stress the way it is, I mean, aside from the fact that we're going to be DF hacking our stress on a regular basis just to kind of keep it normal, once it's fixed so that stress is workable and not broken, I think that mist generators are probably going to be something you're going to want to consider in pretty much every fort. You might not want to have them all over the place. A properly situated mist generator with uh, the right location is going to be far more useful or valuable to you than uh, trying to stick 12 of them around your fort. You're either going to have to flip them on and off regularly manually, or you're going to have a frame rate hit from that many pumps running constantly. So, yes and no, Sinjai. If you are one of those old school players who maybe played the old, 2D versions and you're used to your dwarves tantrum spiraling every time you turn around, then maybe you don't consider stress broken. But I've looked at the forums and I've read the threads on stress, and Toadies admitted it. It's time to start looking at it and going, yeah, it might be busted. And busted features IDF hack. It's I'm not going to teach new players that Dwarf Fortress is micro hell. I don't think when it's working properly that it is micro hell. I think it's fiddly and there's lots of moving parts, but a lot of it is set up once, let run. You don't constantly go in and fiddle with it. Whereas stress in the current version, with the way it works, you're constantly having to investigate each little dwarf to see that they've done a craft and had a chance to pray and talk to somebody today and had an argument, got in the military, and they all have their own needs you're going to have to meet to such a degree that it becomes unworkable. The negative stressors build up faster and stay longer than the positive stressors, and the net result is that stress is a constant downward spiral. It's not a particularly enjoyable mechanic as the way it's implemented currently. Uh, it right. Klein dev's what I'm talking about. Annoyed is fine, and we're going to clean. We're going to do things like smooth our floors and clean up the boulders and provide plenty of activities for our dwarves to do. We're going to do things that you would do to control stress, but I don't think that in the current version, with stress broken, that these things will be as properly effective as they would be in a normal version where stress was implemented and working correctly. It's kind of like the economy. Toady added the economy years and years ago, and it was completely broken. And when enabled, would basically drag your fortress to a complete standstill. Everybody would get kicked out of their bedrooms, and your fortress would spiral out of control. It's just completely broken. So previous versions would allow you to simply disable it completely, and that was advisable at that point. I don't believe there's currently a toggle switch the same way there was for economy, for the stress mechanics. If there were, in the current version, I would just turn it off and say, hey, fair warning, new players, you're going to have to deal with this mechanic in a future version. I debated Senjai on whether I'd actually do the tutorial with this version, and looking at it, I don't think it's realistic to expect new players to kind of pick up all the things that they would have to do to manage stress until it's fixed. It's one of those things that I'll have to do an update or an add-on, if you will, once Tony finally gets around to a release to fix it. He's talking about Senjai. He's talking about after he cuts trees the first time. So he'll go up to the surface, wallop the trees down, and then after that, he's getting his wood from the caves. Alrighty. Let's see. That was a long digression. I apologize. So we've got our beds queued. Let's see here. Who's idle? Anybody? Nope. Lots of praying. So kitchen floor, pasture floor. Let's change this stockpile to also house our generic uncooked food. So instead of just plants in this case, we will allow all here because we want all food. But we will forbid a few types because we don't want unprepared fish. We don't want drinks, that has its own stockpile and it ain't here. We don't want seeds, that has its own stockpile and it ain't here. I wish there were a way to do fat and tallow separately. Ugh, but there's not. Paste, I don't care. That's fine. Pressed material, that's fine. Oils won't build up in such sufficient quantity. That includes milk. And although these aren't technically foods, we'll allow them. Okay, and the rest of that stuff can get added here too. That's fine. So this becomes a general food stockpile. It not only takes from anywhere, but it specifically is fed by the plant chain up here. So what the hell is our farmer doing? These quarry bushes are going to rot if we don't get somebody on them pretty quick. There we go. Okay. Now, let's talk about the kitchen settings. Kitchen settings determine what your dwarves can cook and what they can brew. And it's important to note that certain things, when cooked, function differently. In particular, if you eat a plant, you get a seed. If you mill a plant, you get a seed. If you brew a plant, you get a seed. If you cook a plant, no seeds. So cooking is one of those things you can do that will actually ruin your materials for your fortress if you do too much of it and you're not brewing and milling and processing and eating on the other side. Now, it's okay, it's safe to do things like quarry bushes. The leaves have been processed separately from the seeds. When you process them into a bag, you get the seed back. So those are safe. And you could probably get away with both cooking and brewing your plump helmets as long as you are occasionally still brewing and your cycle doesn't go completely uh, yeah. So what Klein Dev is going through, that's an example of what I mean with things being broken. The rain dawn side effect lasts for ages. There are dwarves who complained about it years and years later. Um, Somebody on the Dwarf Fortress subreddit posted an example of a dwarf who got rained on, and basically it changed his personality in such a way that he was such a suffering martyr that he wanted people to kind of give him credit for it. It's just rain. It happened years ago. Now, brewing is safe. Pigtails and cave wheat here, these can both be brewed, and that'll make booze and give us a seed, so that works good. We've still got fish, but our food is getting burned up pretty quick because the only food we're producing is our plants. Did we? So we've used all the seeds except for sweet pods, and the sweet pods can't be planted because they are uh, too late in the season for sweet pods at this point, I suspect. But that's okay. I will finish out with our quarry bushes. We're making quarry bush roasts. Let's check on how our kitchen worker is actually doing here. Fairly well made quarry bush roast. There you go. Okay, let's go up topside for a second. One of the things I want to do before we get buttoned up here too much is I want to designate plants for picking. And I'm just going to take a wide swath all the way around the fort. Just a giant swath of stuff. And the goal here is just to collect these things for the purposes of getting seeds that we can use later. Let's check on our stocks. And we're doing that because we're still trying to build up those blocks that we need. Yes, good. We've got plenty of blocks now. Good. So remember last time we started to create this surface farm area here that we're going to eventually have. And to do that, we cut out these slits. Now you could farm in the slits. That's perfectly viable. And with the variety of surface plants, it makes perfect sense to do so. If you want an aesthetic, if you want your farms to match, surface to below, and you've done your below farms like this, you could do the same thing on the surface level. But in this case, I think I like the idea of leaving these slits here and raising different crops on each plot as needed. And then we can use the space between them to house uh, the additional seeds, because above ground seeds and plants will generate a lot more types. The problem, Senjai, is basically that it just keeps accumulating. It basically just thoughts aren't going away the way they need to, and positive thoughts are not capable of outweighing negative thoughts over time. Is the long and the short of it. There's a uh, there's a thread out there on the official forums, which I would encourage folks who are, you know, maybe suspicious of what I'm saying or who want to see it for themselves to hop out there. Planet Dev, do you have a link to that stress thread out there on the official forums out there on Bay 12? I can get it, but I'll have to stop and do it, and I'm trying to avoid that. I think it's important for folks who are doing it currently to kind of have an idea of what they're getting into, but it's not insoluble. It's just very, very painful at the moment. Now, got all these guys doing all this delivery here. That's fantastic. Okay, so someone asked the obvious question. Thank you. Why am I flooring over these holes I cut? Well, it has to do with the way Dwarf Fortress currently handles light. Please note that above ground here, outside in the open, we are outside, light, and above ground. Now, if I go to one of these areas I've floored over already and I go below it, we are inside light and above ground. Crops only care about light and above ground to be surface crops. So the fact that this is inside is not relevant. For an example of how this could work, imagine a floor that is effectively a grid, like a grate, only the grid is much smaller. It's basically like holes drilled in a sheet of stone, if you will. And that would be a floor that you could walk on, but it would also be solid and impervious to anything other than siege engines. I saw somewhere a post of someone who had actually taken stone and carved a window from it by cutting it into a decorative grill, if you will. I kind of imagine this as being something similar, although it's below the level of representation of the ASCII or the tile sets, mind you. Yeah, no. See that it's fine, get good, it's fine, get good. There's a lot of that. I learned it, so everybody else should too. I did this, so everybody else should have to too. It's crab pot mentality. It's not good for the game, and it's not good for new players. They shouldn't. Nobody should be doing that. Look, some things don't work right. This game has a bug tracker for a reason. Working around these things is one thing, but completely broken systems need to be acknowledged as that. If Toadie's not getting good feedback because his feedback pool is limited to only those folks on the forums and he's not paying attention to his outstanding bug tracker, there's going to be a problem long term. All right, so we've got our farm spaces walled in, so that's defended now. So still, now we're back to the only access point currently being this staircase, and we want to get rid of it too. But in order to get access to our fortress, we want to have that kind of down here on a stone level somewhere. And what I would generally try to do is have the tavern relatively close to where I'm producing or storing my booze, depending on how I'm doing it. And since we're storing our drinks literally one floor down or two floors down from our brewery, if you will, from our brewery and kitchen, what we'll do is we'll convert the drinks area here into a statue garden, punch a hallway down this way that will lead out to our eventual surface area, depot, tavern, and externalized, less safe areas. And then this will become the main primary artery through which our dwarves enter and leave the fort. And then at that point, we can eliminate this staircase and talk about getting rid of this temporary burrow, just cutting it off, for example, with a wall or something similar, and then we can ignore it completely after that if we want. Uh, Now that we've got some moss down, it's time to start talking about pastures. We dug these spaces out last time, but we didn't actually fill them because we wanted to have our uh, we wanted to have our uh, cave boss have a chance to regrow, so the pastured animals would actually have something to eat. So we'll go ahead and make this into a pasture, and we'll assign to it the animals in different categories. So we'll put our sheep in one pasture, ewe and ram, and then we'll put our pigs in a pasture. And pigs technically do not need the cave moss. They would have been happy as pigs in, well, stone floor if we had just, stuck them right into our meeting hall. And unless one of your dwarves has a real hard on for hating on pigs, there's no real downside to that I'm aware of. Some dwarves will like them, and having them around is not necessarily a bad thing. And since the pigs don't require grazing space, they eat scraps. I think it's safe to say that whatever it is that pigs are eating, it is simply below the level of resolution of the simulation, and I'm okay with that. It's not like we're simulating dwarven toilets here. All right, now before I start, we're putting these guys in pastures, but one set of the animals we got is a set of animals that I'm not going to keep. When we arrived on the embark site, we also had access to two ruminants who were used as draft animals to pull our wagon. Uh, so those guys graze. And you could, if you wanted to keep them around, stash them somewhere with grazing supplies and allow them to eat. And they will need a little more grazing area than, say, sheep, which are smaller. But at the same time, they would also produce different materials on a different schedule, and you could add them into your fort just like all the other animals. But it's not worth it to me to keep a couple of horses around if I could keep a few sheep. The sheep not only produce meat and milk, but also produce uh, wool. So they just basically outweigh the horses in terms of product for my micromanagement investment, if you will. And we'll want to butcher those draft animals so that they don't go to waste. But before we do, we have to make sure we have a way to dispose of leftover byproducts from butchering that we don't want. Specifically, anything you butcher is going to produce stuff like cartilage and nervous tissue, stuff that's not qualified as food, won't be cooked, and will still rot. And we want to set it up in such a way that our fortress will dispose of that material without letting it rot in the open. Because stuff that rots in the open produces miasma, basically a cloud of stench and, you know, decaying gases, if you will. Dwarves hate miasma. It's awful. You don't want it wafting through your corridors, and if you find it wafting through your corridors, you want to find the source and eliminate it as quickly as possible because it will piss your dwarves off in no time. Um, we will set our garbage area up in this fashion, and the intent here is that it is used for dumping of refuse, and by refuse I mean stuff that's going to rot, stuff that we don't want anymore, that's just going to sit there. Now the reason it's dug out in this way, where we've diagonally dug it with a channel down, is we're exploiting a particular quirk of dwarven AI. Dwarves who are using a garbage dump will prefer to throw stuff down a hole if there is a hole adjacent to where they are standing, contained within the garbage dump. So the dwarves will run to use the garbage dump. They will access the first accessible square of the garbage dump, which is right here, and then they will throw stuff in the hole. And when they do, it will drop down to the floor below it, right here, and it will rot. Now, unlike a lot of other things, miasma cannot move diagonally unless that's been changed. We'll find out in a hurry. If it has been, then I have a fix for that. But we're going to assume it hasn't been because I don't figure it has. Stuff that rots will sit here in this hole, and it will rot in this hole, and it will stink up the bottom floor here, and it will stink up the top floor here, but none of the miasma will actually ever escape through the crack out to where the dwarves are. So our dwarves will be standing directly adjacent to a stink cloud that can't escape. It's airtight. Broken systems are broken systems, man. When the developer of the game tells you it ain't working right, I gotta assume it ain't. All right, so now our pigs and our sheep have been pastured. We're going to go ahead and get a pasture set up for our birds. And the birds technically could be pastured just like the pigs in the meeting hall. You could set up nest boxes if you wanted and have your eggs delivered right to the table on demand. How's that for fancy? I don't even think there would actually be a penalty for that unless your dwarf has a particular distaste for the type of bird that you raise. And again, animals nearby make some dwarves a little happier. They give them a minor happy thought from that. So it could be beneficial to actually have nest boxes sitting in your dining hall, as long as you don't care about the additional pathfinding on uh, your birds. Let's see. We're going to set this as a pasture, and in this pasture we will put all of the birds. All right, so that takes care of our birds. Now, the last pasture we need to create is for utility animals and holding space. Now, dogs you're eventually going to want to pasture someplace useful where they can guard your fort, put them on a chain, that kind of thing. But before you have trained dogs, you have untrained dogs. And while untrained dogs aren't really friendly with the goblins either, they're not. The improvement for war training is enough that you don't want untrained dogs fighting goblins. It's bad enough when the trained ones do. You certainly don't want to have the untrained ones do it. We'll stick the horse and the bull, who did our draft animal hauling, in the dog pasture for now. But we're next step is to go up to where the kitchen area is and get us an animal handling space going. So we've got our pasture space here. This is our food stockpile. We'll go back down here and we'll build a workshop here. Actually, on second thought, we'll put that out. We'll put that somewhere else. We don't need it yet, but we're going to need that before we get started too. So let's move him somewhere else, and we'll build him there. So let's see. There's our hospital. Here's our drink stockpile, dining room, food stockpile, empty, 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 empty. Temple. So that means we could use this one. And our leather workers will occupy the floor directly above our temple. Now, realistically, there's not that much leather working that we're going to do, so this will also double as a clothing manufacturing space. We'll do our cloth workshops and looms here as well. Okay, now we have 14 dwarves and we do not have 14 beds, and that is a problem. So we'll go ahead and use those beds to give us a full set of beds in our dormitory, so all of our dwarves have at least a bed to sleep, even if they are all sleeping at the same time. Important now in any fort, in an evil terrain fort, you would already done this, but in our fort, we need to have some surface fortifications. Stat. We have our dormitory. We have a basic dining room, meeting hall. We have a basic statue, garden, temple. We're finishing out that floor that's eventually going to become our leatherworking, but it's not going to take them much longer. It's time to get those blocks working to build surface fortifications so that we can protect ourselves. So there's two ways to go about this. We could build a small shed around our temporary access point, and that's probably what I'll do for right now. I'll build a small 1x1 or a 3x3 shed here with a small drawbridge that just opens and closes to wall it in. And then we will have the ability to close ourselves off. Now that's not going to be our primary entrance. That's an emergency measure purely to keep invaders out. But autumn means a couple things. Our first wagon is going to arrive soon, so we'll need depot space that we don't yet have. We'll need defenses up because if we haven't been invaded already, because we're probably not producing all that much wealth yet. Oh, we don't have a broker with appraisal. I didn't never actually made the guy the broker as well. Oh, let's do that right now. Where you at there? There you are. And now that you have the appraise skill, we can come back into our stocks menu and hey, you can tell us what we've produced. So we've been cautious not to get carried away with overproduction of metal goods and high value things, which has kept our wealth relatively low. If this exceeds 100,000 created wealth, you can expect to have, plus you can add the imported wealth. Basically, your fortress wealth exceeds 100 grand, give or take. You're going to have Titans come pay you a visit. Now, I noticed that we're getting ready to have a serious problem. We've got all these plants and all these drinks, and everything's been eaten. So we're basically picking our last plants at this point. What the heck, guys? Did I not make enough farmers? Or did we really brew everything into food and then eat it? Very sad. Very sad. Sparse, sparse, sparse. Okay, so to fix that, we're going to set a bunch of folks up to go do some plant gathering. Turn plant gathering off on our farmer so he gets some plant gathering done. Build a farmer's workshop so we can start processing plants that we can't brew right away. Although I don't think there are any of those. Yeah, yeah, quit your bitching. Turn down the lavish meal creation until we get a better supply of food materials created. What is our kitchen? What is our farmer doing? He is planting. What is he planting? Please tell me it's something good. Cave wheat. Okay, I can live with that. That'll make booze. We probably need to give somebody else farming skill just for a moment to get the plots built upstairs. Because our farmer is going to be busy planting. Oh, I've got the thousands of hours. Make no mistake there. Don't know that it's necessarily all good. Only perfect practice makes perfect. We're going to have blood rain forever, I think. Let's see what we haven't moved out of the wagon yet. Gypsum plaster, our silk, a bunch of sandbags that can stay there if they have to. They're not worth that much. And that's not all that much. We can actually disassemble the wagon and get all this stuff downstairs fairly quickly. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's get a stockpile created specifically for those last few things we haven't. Oh, and then I gotta remember where gypsum plaster is. I'll be damned, I've done forgotten. Let's see. Well, let's go ahead and get a coffer built, and we'll just set up the hospital. We'll store it there and be done with it. Fuck it, we'll do it live. Yeah, that'll do. Okay, and now we'll need to get a few coffers built in this area. And our dwarves will come along and build those coffers, and then someone will come along and stick the gypsum powder in them. And that was the other thing we didn't add a stockpile for was cloth. And we now have a cloth working area, so that's where we're at. Let's go right there, temple, and then cloth working. All right, now to get those built, we're going to have people with the appropriate skill. That's just temporary. I don't actually expect my smiths to become leather workers and cloth makers. I'm turning off adamantine cloth because this is really a cloth manufacturing area and has nothing to do with adamantine. If we're going to process that later, it's probably not going to be into adamantine threads. We want that processed into something useful, like, I don't know, swords, axes, spears. We'll use thread and cloth here. We'll make sure that this can take bins, and then we'll make a stockpile on the other side that will handle our leather. The only type of refuse I'm allowing are fresh, raw hides. And the intention here is that when something is butchered, its fresh, raw hide is delivered to the leatherworking area. But if it becomes a rotten raw hide, it gets dumped in the refuse bin and chucked, we hope, because it's definitely no longer acceptable in this stockpile. Because it's going to stink the joint up. We don't want that. So the idea is once those skins are made, they're immediately dragged down here, stuffed in a bin, and our tanner comes along and deals with them immediately, hopefully, so that we don't have to mess with it. Okay, so now we've got that. We've got that all set up. Do we have our butcher? Yes, we've got butchering, we've got tannering, we've got leatherworking. Okay, good. So we've got all the necessary skills to process these things once we do them. Now, be cautious of doing this if you're playing in evil terrain. Your skins come back, your bones come back, everything will come back and try to kill your dwarves. You don't want that. Yeah, I don't care. We're a little late getting our depot up. Wah, wah, wah. Since it's the dwarves, we really don't care particularly over much. We're just going to confiscate their stuff anyway. Confiscating the stuff from the dwarven caravan is safe, although you take a hit for it in later years because they don't bring you as much stuff until they've had profits from you. But initially, it's an easy way to get them to world is the same as ever. Yay! What would you like them to bring? I'll tell you what I'd like them to bring. I'd like them to bring metal bars. I'd like them to bring all the metal bars. I want every metal bar they can fit in the wagon, and then I want 6 more wagons full of metal bars on top of them. I want them to bring me wagons full of metal bars. Let's see. We'll also take seeds in whatever quantity they can bring. Not always, but right for this first couple of caravans, it's really useful to get seeds brought. Uh, let's see. Anvils we'll make. Pets. Pets is particularly useful. You can use this to expand your animals that you have. You can use this to add additional types. You can use this to bring food that you have to butcher when you're ready to use it. Um, Typically, I will only order those things that I'm actually going to use as production animals. So that is my peahens, peacocks, sheep, pigs, dogs. If my cats ran out, which is highly unlikely, but in the event that my male cat was killed or my female cat was killed, and I no longer had a breeding pair for whatever reason, then I could order another cat if I really wanted to. I would not order cats en masse unless your intent is to take them out of cages and immediately start butchering them when they arrive. Um, Gotta keep the cats under control, guys. It really does add up. So let's see what else you got here. Thread, yeah, I'll take thread, and I'll take any cloth they're going to bring too, because cloth is valuable to them and harder for me to produce in quantity initially, and serves as a way for me to get extra bins into the fort additionally. And I'll take the sand they bring because I don't believe we have a way to get sand on site. I'll double check, but I don't think we do. Miscellaneous, we can use your. And we'll take whatever cloth you want to bring. I don't care about tools, clay sheets. We'll have plenty of those before in the next season or so. Let's see. Leather. We do want leather. Now, this is not because leather is particularly valuable, but leather, like cloth, has a large number of uses: clothing, cloaks, accoutrements for your dwarves, patches, bags. It's an enormous variety of things you can use it for. And since they are not, strictly speaking, durable goods in the Dwarf Fortress sense, leather and cloth will be necessary in future to replace them as well. And it's not something I would normally order because normally I'm embarked in somewhere a lot more, how shall I say this, wooded than where we are right now. But for right now, we don't have easy access to trees, so getting some more wood in would be good because it'll allow us to make beds. Now, we still have plenty of wood on the surface that we can cut for immediate needs, but trees take a long time to grow. We're in an area with very few trees. The rate of replacement will probably not keep up with our potential demand. Metal bars allow you to meet all those obscure noble demand stuff made from bismuth bronze needs, as well as allowing you access to metals you might not have on site. If you're on a bronze only site because iron doesn't exist where you're located, ordering iron here is useful. Um, if you're stuck in a place without flux stone, you can order stone. But stone is heavy enough that ordering flux, you'll only get a few stones a season per caravan, and it will make your steel production slow. It's not impossible to do it that way, but you definitely won't be cranking out steel goods quickly. As far as other things that are useful, you could pick up gypsum plaster is usually hard to come by. I have to double check to see what quicklime is used for. I haven't used it in a while. We'll go ahead and order some because we're going to have a supply of stuff to sell when they arrive. We'll make ourselves some instruments and toys just to have folks to have something to play with and use for their prayers. Trap components will be one of the things we sell, assuming the value hasn't been nerfed through the floor. We could use the small cut gems, but I would rather make glass if we have sand on site. And for now, let's just go ahead and use those because the caravan has a limited supply of what it will bring. And you'll notice that anything they bring. Oh, that's all the leathers. I thought that was all the different categories. I was like, why is bodywear in the list? I didn't order bodywear. So this is what they're going to bring and what they'll charge us for us. The stuff they didn't ask or that we didn't ask for, they're only going to give 100% cost to. Anything we demanded at a high rate, they'll charge us double for everything. Frankly, it won't matter. We're going to, by the time the Dwarven Caravan comes next autumn, we're going to have a finely tuned industrial machine capable of cranking out millions of dwarf bucks as fast as we can get the dwarves with skills and the resources excavated to do it. Between high value stone goods, the ability to make porcelain objects from fire clay, We have iron on site, so we can make iron items in bulk. We can make trap components from various materials that we still have. We will be able to crank out money if we really want to. Okay, so what are they wanting? That because that's how we get money in quantity from them. If they make something, if they want something that we can make in. See, if we get to the point where we can make prepared meals, we can sell any excess we have, and we'll get a higher price for them than normal. Most of the rest of these things are either we could dictate making figurines. I guess that could be done. I wouldn't sell my thread. I'd use it to make cloth. We have blocks, but blocks aren't going to be worth a whole lot, and they're kind of heavy. So in large quantities because of their low value. Um, Short swords is doable, but 120% isn't all that much. And leg wear is nice, but not that much. None of this is particularly ideal. Figurines is okay. I'll have to double check and see if the manager allows us to dictate figurines. I'm not sure that it does, but that's okay. So let's see. Can I queue up figurines specifically? Oh, good. We can. Perfect. So we could dictate make rock figurines and say make at least, oh, I don't know, 50 of the things. If under conditions we have, oops, not that job, oops, conditions, daily, because why not? And we'll do products if figurines is no is less than 100. Now, the reason we're doing that is because individual figurines aren't particularly valuable and we want to have a large number of them. They get stored in bins. They don't take up as much room once they're stored properly, which is nice. This will allow us to make crafts that we know that they will buy at a higher than normal price. But we have not yet built a suitable. Oh, we need to get a stockpile for all these. Oh, that's our depot. That's okay. But is that? Yeah, those look like weapons that are laying around. Let's make sure they get moved indoors. Yeah, that's our bronze battle axes. We want those indoors. So let's make sure our stockpile down here will hold weapons as well. So it's time to start talking about what will eventually become an overflow stockpile. So here in the here off the dining room, and I do this because it's easy to remember where it's at, and we'll be looking at the dining room on a fairly regular basis for things like nobles, nobles' rooms, coffin arrangements. And this stockpile is going to hold everything, take from anywhere, and give to just about every other stockpile in existence. And the intent is everything that's being produced can use this as a stockpile, but generally speaking, it will only house overflow that isn't going into one of your other stockpiles, meaning that you either need to expand your other stockpiles or use up the materials in your other stockpiles to make room. A real new player probably won't go, normally wouldn't be tempted to go straight into bronze. But because of the way Dwarf Fortress handles embark costs, it is far, 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 far more efficient to bring raw goods and manufacture what you need on site than to bring finished goods in any case where doing so is not going to screw you. You can't make an anvil on site if you don't have an anvil, or I'd bring iron bars instead of an anvil. So if Toady ever fixes it so that anvils are a product of a forge or are a product of something like a smelter instead of a forge, which realistically, you cast an anvil, so a smelter makes more sense than the forge anyway. But um, if Toady makes it so that you can manufacture an anvil without requiring an anvil, then at that point I would stop bringing anvils and start bringing iron bars to make them because it would be cheaper to bring an iron bar at like 24 or $30 rather than spending 100 on a finished anvil. Even if it took 2 or 3 bars, I'd still be making a slight cost break. If it takes 4 bars, you no longer break even. You're better off taking the anvil. But if it takes 4 bars, I'd wonder why your product is worth less than what's going into it. And the first of many kitten biscuits is, oh, I'm sorry, kittens is born. How are we doing on food? We are all starving. Awesome. What the hell, guys? Did we like pick none of the plants? Did we brew nothing? Okay, that's what's happened. They damn cook has gone rip shit on the fucking meals and hasn't brewed shit. I wish there were a way to suspend these. But we'll simply invert the condition, and since we have less than the meals anyway, it's not going to produce more. We're above 200 meals, but we've burned all our damn plants and we don't have any damn booze, which is a problem. Wondered why the hell we weren't getting any booze. We can fix this. We will cast a wider net. And that will get removed, which will give us a few extra logs. If you're really wanting to be efficient with your embark points, technically speaking, you can avoid bringing logs and you can use the wagon as your logs. The downside to that is all of your stuff explodes all over the ground and you're left with having to clean it up. It's a little unsightly, and the wagon is slightly easier to defend than a giant pile of stuff from thieves, for example. Downside is all these dwarves are picking all these plants, but none of them are particularly good at it, so there's a lot of plant picking that's not producing a whole lot. There we go. Now, while we're at it, we're going to go back down to the kitchen. We're going to cancel the existing jobs, if any. Oops, I thought I removed that. I meant to. Did I remove? Hmm. We'll figure it out. Okay, and now that we've got some plants, we'll actually brew some booze and solve the booze problem pretty quick. Okay. Which reminds me, now, let's go back down to the floor above our cloth shop, not for any particular reason, just because it's the first one we have available, and dig out a new floor. Now, mining is a higher priority task than herbalism, so our miners will break off from any herb picking they've been doing outside and come running to mine. Once this is mined out, we'll use this as a Senjai, you can download it as a zip. You need to go out. The sound pack can even be downloaded as a zip. You need to go out to their website and get it from there. If you do it as you do it as an update from inside the product, it connects to the server and downloads each file individually because it checks them individually. It would probably be more efficient for their bandwidth if they had something locally that zipped up the files you wanted and then sent you the file you needed, but that would be subject to some space considerations. Okay, so workshop we want here is the Craftsdwarf workshop. Now, Craftsdwarf workshops have actually many uses. Bones, wood, stone, all that stuff gets made by Craftsdwarves. So we want lots of them. And generally speaking, I will have Craftsdwarf's workshops all on one floor, and then the necessary stockpiles nearby. So the floor above this will be where we'll put the masons for the purpose that down here is where the meat's getting stored, or the leather's getting stored. Right here is where the bones are getting stored. The stone is getting stored on the floor above that. The wood will store on the floor above that, and then we'll start back into the main fortress proper. Uh-oh, that's not good. What's up? Where at? Oh, well, we don't care. They're off in cave land over there. Good luck, kids. Have fun. Giant rat getting trounced in the dungeon, apparently. Bats and the rats are not getting along. Oh, we're short. We need to get some more blocks made. So let's get this dug out a little bit and get our mason not only a space for his workshops, but also storage space for the boulders. Oh, wow. Really, Clanadev? I don't consider metal advanced. I consider metal early game if you can get there, if you have it on site especially. It's definitely something. Bringing the raw metals and making metal picks and metal axes out of the gate is something I would do in every fortress ever, even if I was already bringing picks and axes to be prepared on site. Oh well, we didn't get to trade this time. Boo hoo. Oh, hey, that reminds me. We've got all those plants, and now they've been brewed. We're going to have seeds from all of them. So let's plant some stuff. I think I may have screwed myself here because I think I made them all vertical up here. Yes, I did. That was bad. Kind of didn't check it. These farm plots are very aesthetically pleasing and very freaking wrong. SoundSense probably hasn't updated because there's not really, other than new game events, much to update for it. It runs pretty well flawlessly for me. I can't honestly say I've ever had a problem with it. Now, since we have all this cave moss, one thing you'll want to do is occasionally designate your sand areas, your clay areas underground here for uh, herb collection, because we're basically sitting on a pile of plants inside our fort that grow up in our pastures. And you can harvest them just like additional farm space. It's not as efficient as actual farms, but you can go up one more floor now that I'm thinking about it. We can do all of this at once. But you can take advantage of them being there basically for free. No, Tony does not, as far as I know, ever telegraph releases other than when he starts getting very close. He starts letting folks know he's in that last bug fixing phase before the releases start to land. He'll sometimes make estimates, but any estimate longer than a few days is not something I would count on. Debugging is an often complex process and it can rapidly spiral beyond what you initially expect. New dwarves, all of them. Whole migration wave straight into the hauler core every time. This does two things. First off, it means I can immediately sort my migrants and immediately go back to playing. But second of all, it means that when I sort by profession, my migrants are generally the biggest profession because they are where all the new dwarves have been, and it's also the single pool that I'll draw all of my specialized professions from. So when I'm looking for specialist dwarves to do the tasks that need to be done in particular, I can look at the hauler core and know that these folks don't have something else that they're doing right now because I've already failed to assign them to anything. And if they're ready to be specialized, they will effectively graduate from the hauler core. Okay, so now we've got all our haulers here. Let's take a look what we got. Oh, there's a wax worker. Congratulations, Kleine Dev. You've just got your dwarf. So, question you asked, do I ever feel unconnected to my dwarves? Here's the problem. Until Toady gets dwarves to a point where caring about them is a valuable exercise and not an exercise in micromanagement, then no. Dwarves are ants. Um, I generally will treat them as the same as much as possible. Now, that's obviously not going to be something I can just universally say all my dwarves are the same. That's not going to work. But I try to treat them humanely by providing them as much of a fantastically awesome, super beautiful, wonderful fortress as I can. And the downside to that is that I will expect them to live under my fascistic military rule where dwarves do the job I assign them indefinitely. Now, it's not all bad. I typically don't assign dwarves jobs, uh, that they're not qualified to do initially, unless I literally have no one qualified to do them. So when nobody is the chief doctor dwarf because I don't have anybody who's capable of doctoring, somebody's got to do that job, and nobody's better at it than anybody else. You could pick through your dwarves and look for somebody who would like to do it, but chances are If you get a migrant later, they're going to come in with a higher skill, and you're going to immediately make them the doctor, whether they're good or whether they like doing it or not. So, if as long as skill remains the primary consideration for whether dwarves should be doing a thing or not, dwarves effectively allow you, like clay, to remold them into the thing you want them to be. If you take a dwarf with no skills, you can develop him in any direction you want. Take a dwarf with low skills, and you can effectively rewrite the things that he's good at, and by making him practice them over and over again, unless it's something he absolutely direly hates, he's going to come to be good at it and generally get better at it and be more suited for it. As he exercises those skills, his attributes will change to improve along the lines of the thing that he's doing. He will become better at it. He might not like it necessarily, but once he's skill 20, he's just going to be cranking out masterworks anyway. Let him whine in the tavern. Yeah, I don't think it's realistic if I don't think it's realistic for players without a huge amount of additional automation to be monitoring every dwarf in a 200 dwarf fortress for the things that they're good at and what they like and whether they've changed their mood today to decide that they want to be able to do something else better than they did yesterday. Um, it just doesn't seem realistic. I think where you can, you assign dwarves jobs that they're good at, and where you must, you assign dwarves jobs that need to be done. I normally don't bother to pick favorites. I need cooks, I need miners, and as long as those tasks are getting done, you're all doing great. You're all wonderful, and I'll treat you all like my special little angels as much as I can. Um, but I'm not going to attempt to be a mind reading over deity scoping in on a dwarf or any particular set of dwarves to monitor their every need unless I'm trying to baby them through some crisis. So these guys are already starting. Oh, I thought there was a. That's why I couldn't find it. Wasn't turned on. So he's quite content, apparently. Most of my dwarves are fine. Now the problem is I think some of their negative skills stuff will start to. We could micromanage some of it away, but realistically, I want them to get in the fortress and then get this walled up. Is that better, Senjai? I noticed it might have got bumped away when I was talking earlier. It's kind of a flexi mic, so it tends to bend if I bump it the wrong way. So yeah, sometimes I don't notice that it's not right by my mouth. I'm not paying attention to it. Professional broadcasting quality. This is not. We do this for charity. We do not do this for money. Okay, so let's get these farm plots built up again because we screwed it up the first time. By we, I mean me, of course, because you all wouldn't doing it. No, no, man. I don't mind users chiming in to let me know if I'm doing something that's not conducive to a good broadcast. If you guys are not able to hear me because I've bumped the mic away and I'm not noticing it, then the chance exists that somebody's going to miss out on uh, what I'm trying to teach, and that's completely defeating the purpose of what I'm trying to do. Barley, barley, and we didn't plant anything here, but we'll just assume it's going to be barley. We'll go ahead and do alfalfa here on all 4 seasons for now. And then that's probably all the alfalfa we've gotten to. Now remember, the seeds are right below, so I can, if I need to, build additional stockpiles up here, but that's not really a long distance. You're talking about, 6 or 8 squares from barrel to farm. You can improve it. You could put the stockpile for alfalfa right here and have a dedicated alfalfa stockpile, for example, and that would be faster. Oh, no, no, scoundrel. A minute ago it was a little low. It's cool. I moved Mike. It's a flexible boom, and it tends to, if I bump it with something like a drink or my arm, then it gets bent out of position and it's further away from my mouth than it should be. All right, where are we at with the surface fortifications? We are not complete, of course, because we're also going to need something I haven't done yet, but first we need to get this wall up. Bear with me a second, guys. I'm being attacked by the cat. One of my rescue cats has come to get attention for trying to figure out what I'm doing here. All right, I think that's everything I need. I need the ramp temporarily to get a roof onto this single-story entrance bunker. And downstairs, I believe we need to check on one other thing. How's our food doing? Good, food's good, but we need to brew up the plants we can, and we also need to butcher the hell out of some animals. Now, I would typically, and I'm going to go back up, we're going to let the horse foal and the donkey foals grow up. If we do get unless I have to kill them, uh, any animals that are come in their immature forms, if I can keep them alive in a pasture temporarily, then it's worthwhile to let them grow up because when they get to full grown size, they get larger size, they produce more meat, more bones, more materials, and it doesn't really cost me anything so long as the pasture space is large enough. This early in the fort, we don't have a large number of a huge number of dogs, so we could stick the foals in with them or in with the sheep, which haven't really reproduced a whole lot yet. And there's enough grazing space, I think, to make that work. We could stick them in with the birds or the pigs, and since they don't need the grazing space, it's up to whether the other grazers actually eat everything. At which point we can keep these 3 foals alive that we have for a few seasons till they grow up, and then turn around and butcher them. Since I'm not really planning to keep them long term, all the full-grown ones, axing them now. I can just make meat and bones out of them, get rid of the rest of the materials, build up a food stockpile. We need food so that we're not just burning our plants on food and booze. We want that booze to be, or we want those plants to be running exclusively through the booze cycle if possible. And we also need to get our Craftsworks workshop working on, can add that too. Yep, that's the problem. Empty food storage item. Now, there's a few ways you can get food storage items for your fort. The easiest one at the very beginning in most forts is going to be barrels because you can simply cut wood and make barrels and you're in business. But wood is also used to make beds. Beds are far more useful and valuable to you than barrels and bins. So you're going to want, at least at the beginning anyway, until you got plenty of beds for everybody. So you're going to want to have an additional supply for storing your food. And generally, what I will recommend for new players is rock pots. Rock pots are very easy to make. You go to a Craftsworks workshop, which none of our guys have actually built yet, so we need to get somebody to do it. Let's see. Do we have anybody who's good at stone crafting? No, no, we don't. Okay, well, since nobody's better than anybody else, congratulations, FICOD. Do you have another skill? Nope, you're a completely useless nobody. Congratulations, today is your lucky day. You are being promoted to stoneworker. Yay, FICOD! I'm turning off your masonry and your stone detailing because I want you to work exclusively on manufacturing stone goods for trade and use. FICOD is going to get really good at this really fast because it's going to consume her life. What do you call that job? That's what I thought. But then we'll probably have to specify which instrument, and that's probably our problem. So let's see. Looks like we can only make plectrums at the moment. And the shameb is going to require strings, and the other is going to require a frame and a body. And I wonder what they require. These are probably something else, bone maybe, or wood. We'll have to see what they're made out of. Okay, we'll come back to them. Toys. Oh, that's right. We're going to get a bunch of figurine jobs too for trade. That'll work. And we're going to need a couple of stonecraft. Yeah, that's probably about as good as it's going to get. Okay. So that specializes our smiths. We don't need any more smiths unless we have so many jobs that we simply can't have them all done by one person in any reasonable length of time. And the reality is we're not going to have so many smithing jobs that that should ever really be a problem. And while wood burning is going to be done by haulers, generally speaking, if the smiths need, or if we don't have any coal, the smiths need to be doing that too. Okay, so let's take a look here. We've got our stone worker, Vicod, doing detailing, or stone crafting. Let's see. You have trapping and nothing else. Congratulations. You are going to get made into a new dwarf for hunting. We'll give you all these lovely animal labors, except trapping, because I don't give a shit about trapping. And small animal dissection does nothing in the current version, as far as I'm aware. I'm not even sure animal care has been changed yet. Okay, so we'll have you do that. And these guys will also handle butchery, tanning, leatherworking, bone carving, wood crafting. And it's not because I expect them to necessarily be good at all of these tasks, I don't, but because he is going to be elevated to a new custom profession for hunting. And we'll need to supply him with a crossbow and bolts. And while he's not particularly good at it now, he'll get there. So we'll crank off one run of bolts. Oh, it's that log. Which is task. Somebody's coming along to pick it up, and then it'll be okay to build the bridge. Okay, so we also need to build, and we're going to go down to our craft store's workshop temporarily and build it there because we need a space to put it, and that's as good as any. Mechanics workshops are used to build things with moving parts, whether it be dwarven machines like pumps or uh, raising and lowering drawbridges, retracting bridges, floodgates that work from levers, levers themselves. Basically, if it involves quote unquote machinery, it's a machinist's workshop or mechanics workshop you need. Um, we'll need to crank out some components from this, and we'll need to get somebody who can do that. I don't think we have anybody yet with any mechanic skill, so we can pick a dwarf out who isn't going to be doing anything else and put them to work. And our mechanics will double up as our architects. We don't need these guys doing that job anymore. Might have a couple, and I'm not particularly worried about the architecture of my building. Oops. Apparently I turned him off before I did that. So we'll just update it. We'll also let them do siege operation if it becomes relevant. Um, we probably won't get siege engines until fairly late, and we we'll employ them at that point against sieges, obviously. All right. So it is now 10:30, guys. So next time we're going to look to build our tavern, our proper final depot site, our we'll finish walling in and closing off the bridge bunker there where our current entrance is. And that'll give us a fort where if something comes to play and we're not ready for it, we can simply button the fort up and call it a day. So tomorrow I'm planning to come back on again at about 8:30, and I'll run or 8, excuse me, and I'll run till 10 or 10:30 tomorrow. Now I may run a little later tomorrow because it's Friday and I can get away with it. On Saturday, we will probably do it earlier in the day. I have an evening commitment that I do every other week, and it I can't do this in place of that. Um, so we'll probably look to do it sometime between say noon and 4. We probably won't go for the whole 4 hours or anything. I'll just look for somewhere in that range, and I'll get a better picture of that tomorrow. Um, for those of you who are looking to uh, be reminded when I come online for this event, remember we're going to be doing this for a total of 33 days in a row for charity, culminating in a 24-hour live stream on November 2nd. And I'll spend the entire time teaching you and demonstrating what I've learned about how to play Dwarf Fortress so that even a new player could do it. Tomorrow we'll get to taverns, we'll wall up, seal in, and then we'll start looking at military and things that we can do to secure our space, not just wall our space off. But in terms of safety, the first thing and the most important thing you can kind of do is to get your dwarves underground, indoors, behind walls. Currently, in the current version, nothing destroys walls, so if you're inside and you're sealed off, nothing can get to you. Technically, you can run like that forever. You can ignore migrants, let the entire surface world be flooded with lava, and die. And your dwarves would survive as long as they can avoid stress in their interior home. Now, before I go, does anybody have any questions over what we did tonight? Why I did something? Anything I failed to explain to your satisfaction? All right. Not seeing any questions, so I'm going to call it for tonight. I'll spend a little time away from the fortress, as it were, before I have to hit the hay and do the work thing in the morning. You all be good to one another, and I'll catch you all tomorrow at 8 p.m. Talk to you later, guys.